Yes, yes.
Awesome. Let me know when you want to start.
Okay, we can start.
Awesome. Well, good morning and good afternoon. Well, this is a presentation of Habitat, yes, and I'll just start with this first sort of long sentence here, just to give you an idea what Habitat is. So it reads, Habitat is a modular architecture example focused on streamlining the Sitecore development process and optimizing long-term productivity. Now, this during this presentation, I'll try to go into details and hopefully cover what this means, and give you an idea of the different highlighted elements there. Now, before I get started, I'll just want to sort of cover a few things. So in my experience, one of the most fundamental things about building websites and building marketing solutions is change. One thing is certain is that once you build a website or a marketing solution, the customer or the product owner will want to change something. And that's in my experience, that's a given. So we are really building these websites not as projects, but as starts of a process where change is inevitable. Another certainty is that the cost of change will increase over time. Now, this is also a given in software development. If you have a solution and you've installed it, then over time it'll be more and more expensive to maintain that solution. So the challenge for us as developers, as architects, is how do we make sure that productivity stays high? How do we make sure that the development cost or the maintenance cost over time does not increase rapidly, but that the decline is as flat as possible? In my so this is a very subjective statement, but in my experience, I've been doing Sitecore solutions for many years, and I've trained a lot of Sitecore developers. But in my view, building a Sitecore solution is fairly easy. I mean, during a 3-day developer course, you can get quite far in the development cycle. You can get your Sitecore website up and running. You can start building your pages and your components and your renderings and templates and all those kind of things. Now, what's hard about Sitecore solutions is when it starts growing. And once you've got a lot of functionality in there, and the coupling between that functionality starts to hinder your progress, starts to stifle your productivity, and just makes it really hard to change things or add things. And this is, of course, where architecture comes in. So this is where we have to keep the eye on the ball and make sure that the architecture is right. Because if we don't, this is sort of an inverted view of the other chart that I showed you before. The minute we start adding more modules, the actual productivity, the time that we spend on actually building new features will decrease quite rapidly if we don't control the dependencies and the architecture tightly. This is something that I've seen countless times in Sitecore solutions. Is if the architecture isn't controlled quite closely, then you just get spaghetti. You get a whole lot of code that is very hard to maintain and very hard to extend. So architecture is really important, and especially the dependencies and the coupling between the different elements and features in your solution, because this is in my view one of the fundamental parts of software architecture is dependency control and coupling between different features. And this includes the direction of dependencies, what is a module, what is a component, so defining the different properties of the architecture. And if this is done right, that whole chart goes a lot flatter. It means that the control, the dependencies between the features become less of a problem. And the coupling, the effort that you spent on actually trying to decouple or extend becomes a lot less, and you can focus on building the right things, building the features, and not controlling, making sure that you don't break one thing when you're adding another. And in a modular architecture, if the dependencies and control, this is when modules appear. This is when you can actually start defining modules within the architecture. Because if you don't have control of dependencies, then it's not modules. A module is something that is maintained by itself and controlled by itself. And once you have dependencies all over the place, then at that point it's not a module. It's just a piece of a solution. So going back to the definition here, Habitat is a modular architecture example focused on streamlining the Sitecore development process and optimizing long-term productivity. So first of all, the modular architecture is, for some people, a new way of thinking of Sitecore. And this is what I'll try to go into details on. What does it mean? How is it done? What's the ramifications of your development process? Those kind of things. So, and also or Habitat is defined is focused on the development process. It's not focused on the features or the scalability or the performance. It's not production code. It's not meant for you to take this and run with it. It's an example of how you can structure a solution to make yourself more productive. And the last thing, again, it's about long-term productivity. It's about having a solution that you can extend and add and change over time as well. Not only in that short project period where you're building the solution. So it's about lasting benefits. So it's an open framework. It's accessible for everyone. It's based on standards. And it's, again, focused on architecture and methodology. We'll go through a lot more on that in the presentation. A quick disclaimer. As I mentioned, Habitat is not a starter kit. So it's not meant for you to get a quick win. It's not something you install on a server and then you get a website up and running. It's not meant to be that. Also, the updates that we do to Habitat is not necessarily backwards compatible. So when you look at Habitat, when you apply Habitat and start working with it or adopt it, don't think of Habitat as something that you need backwards compatibility, or you don't need to reference Habitat as a version backwards, because it can change. And this also goes to the third one. It's not an officially supported module or things like that from Sitecore. It's an example again. It's a framework and a set of practices that are yours to adopt. So look at it. If you like it, if you like the way that it works, just like any practices. If you don't like everything, then don't adopt everything. But if you like parts of it, then adopt that. At least now you have an example to show you how does it work. How can you get things like configuration management or template inheritance or modularities or things like that. It's an example to show you these kind of things. So it's yours to adopt and yours to treat as your own. Quick sort of agenda for the presentation. I'll walk through a little more of the concepts and the thoughts behind the modular architecture, and then I'll just briefly talk about how to get started. And then the main part of the presentation, I'll go through just how is it to work with Habitat, so how does that work? A little thing about me: I work in a department in Sitecore called Field Product Marketing. I'm a technical manager. Effectively, it means I'm responsible for the Habitat project, but also for the demos that we do internally in Sitecore, or that we build for the internal and external partners in the future. So we are Habitat is spawned out of the need for a new demo platform. So the need for us to show the features of Sitecore and the way to not only build Sitecore, but also how to work with Sitecore. Before I joined Sitecore about 2 years ago, I was part of the founding company of Sitecore, Pentia, and where I worked in the end as the CTO of that company. So I've done a lot of implementations on Sitecore, a lot of architecture, and a lot of development on Sitecore. Okay, a little bit about the underlying architecture before we dive into the example. So why is modular architecture in Sitecore a good idea? First of all, it's about managing the solution. It's about isolating features and isolating parts of the solution to make so that you don't have to manage the solution as a whole, but manage it in smaller chunks. It's also about flexibility. It's about surfacing the dependencies so that the flexibility of changing one part is higher. So it gives more possibilities for the business to come in and say, I want to change this feature, and then not run the risk of changing something else or breaking something else in the process. And which also goes towards reliability. So it makes it a lot easier to test things and to reliably change parts of the solution. And this goes with both functional tests, unit tests, performance tests, stress tests, everything, really. Another important thing about modularity is that this is a domain-driven type modularity, which means that the modular architecture and the domain language of the business is what should be reflected in the modular name. And we'll get back to that a bit, but it's important in this type of architecture that you understand what the customer is asking for, and then you implement that. So if the customer is asking for a search feature, you build a search feature. You don't build a Lucene feature or a Google search feature or a Coveo feature, because in the end, the customer is actually asking for search. They're not asking for Lucene or Google. So this also means that once the customer says, well, the search is a bit non-functional or too slow or whatever, you can actually change the underlying technology. You can change from, let's say, Lucene to Coveo without having to change the whole structure and the whole naming and things like that, because you're working with the customer's words and the domain language. And then, of course, finally, it's about that productivity. So it's about long-term development cost. Habitat is the modular architecture in Habitat has two primary concepts. One is the concept of layers, which is the different. It's not the traditional N-tier layer where you have the presentation, the business logic, and the data layer, but it is similar to that, but a little different. In Habitat, we have 3 layers: project, feature, and foundation. The important thing about that is dependencies. So in the top, you have the sort of the content and the presentation layer. This is the part that you actually see on screen. This is the templates, the data types, the templates that the customer creates inside Sitecore. It's the page types, the pages on the website. The features is all the isolated pieces, the renderings on the pages, so to speak. And then the foundational frameworks is the APIs that you commonly use across everything. And the modules within that architecture then resides in all these layers. So you have modules that sit in the project layer, other modules that sit in the feature layer, and then a third set of modules in the foundation layer. And what is important about these modules is the dependency between them. As we saw in the sort of hierarchical structure before, this is the same thing. When you have a project module, then the dependencies from that project module only goes towards the feature layer or the foundation layer. You should never have a dependency from the feature layer up to the project layer. It's a very, very important part of this architectural principle. Just a bit of links for you to go and either buy some books and or Kindles or whatever you're reading. Also, a few blog posts there, MVP blog posts about Habitat that I would recommend you to pick up on. The first 2 books is very fundamental to this whole architectural principle, so I really recommend you to read those books. They're really good. So a quick run through of how to get started on Habitat. Now, Habitat is, as I mentioned before, available to everybody. So it's on GitHub. You can go, you can have a look at the source code, and there's a wiki there as well. The latest release can be viewed on habitat.sitecore.net. So if you want to use it, again, it's not about having that backwards compatibility. So what I would suggest you to on GitHub is to take Habitat, fork it out into your own project, and then start changing and developing it and playing with it, extending it, change it to your needs, maybe even change some of the fundamental parts of it. But don't rely on a backwards compatibility. If you do think there's something that is just really, really good that you've developed, we would love to get that back into Habitat. So if there's anything that if there's a bug somewhere, or if there's a feature that you've created that you think is really good, do submit a pull request back to the Habitat branch or to the Habitat repository, and we in the team will revise it and have a look, see if it fits in the project. And also, we're using the issue management on GitHub. So if you do have any issues, just raise a question there or a problem there, and we'll get back to you. We're pretty good at answering them as quickly as possible. Again, I'm not going to go into show you how to set up everything. There is a really good video that Martina Willander from Sitecore has created on how to install and set up Habitat. The wiki part of the GitHub repository has a description as well. But fundamentally what you need is a Sitecore solution. So Sitecore 8.1 and the license file, of course. Web Forms for Marketers module is installed, and Visual Studio. And then you're pretty much running. There's no additional software needs, nothing like that. There is a few technologies that if you haven't caught up on those already, then have a look at them. MVC, everything is MVC. We are using Bootstrap as the front-end framework because we need to have one set of front-end framework. And again, it's about standards. So you'll see that the HTML inside Habitat is very standard Bootstrap. We're using Sass as the CSS extension language, so compiled CSS, so to speak. The packages, we're using NuGet for the C# or Visual Studio packages, and then we're using Node, the Node package manager, for some of the build scripts. I'll just briefly show that to you as well. Sitecore Instance Manager, Sitecore Rocks is good to have. And then I guess just highlighting Unicorn as the serialization that we're using. We have, I don't think it's quite apparent on the GitHub repository, but we're using TeamCity to automate, and so we have the whole process automated. So once we submit things into the repository, there's a build server that triggers continuous integration. We have continuous deployment, but all that is the topic of a whole other, a whole new session. So just what is in the box right now? We have 3 project components. We have the Habitat website, which is the one that you see on habitat.sitecore.net. There's a demo website there as well, which I can mention briefly later. There's a set of common things because we will be creating more websites on top of this. So there's a few common parts to it. Then there's the whole feature set. So what does the website actually do? And this is, we have now how many, 10, 15 features. We will probably extend that. We will extend it with more coverage of the product. So we'll have things like EXM in there, Sitecore Commerce, print, whatever. All the modules in Sitecore will eventually be covered with features. And then, of course, the foundation, which is the API level modules, things like multi-site. So there's an API or an extension to Sitecore that we built, which covers multi-site a bit better, makes it a bit easier for the features. Serialization, which is the serialization of items, those kind of things. And then, of course, underlying, there's a whole set of frameworks, which is very inherent in the way that features and foundation and projects are built. Things like Bootstrap, for example. The HTML across the features will all have to be centralized around Bootstrap. And item serialization is through Unicorn and those kind of things. So this is sort of the practical part. So let's have a look. Before we start on that, just want to hear if you're still there, if there's any questions.
Yeah, yeah. You can continue. Any questions? No, we can continue.
Awesome, good. Okay, so let us have a look at it. So this is the Habitat website. As it's looking today, this is what you'll have running locally when you go through the getting started guides and go through the video or the explanation on how to get started. On the file system, when you do a commit, or sorry, a pull of the repository, this is pretty much what you get. So there's a few packages that are installed during the installation project or process, the setup process. But under source, this is the source code. There's a common folder which is a bit out of place here, but these 3 is again the features or the layers in Habitat. So you have the feature layer, the foundation layer, and the project layer. If I go into the feature layer, you'll see that we have folders for all the different modules. So the way that the architecture works is through conventions. So we have a set of conventions that define how to structure components and modules. So if we look at the accounts feature, for example, under the accounts feature module, there are three folders. One for the Visual Studio code. So this is the actual Visual Studio project. We have another for the items in Sitecore, the templates, the renderings, those kind of thing. And there's another for the core database here. And we have some unit tests that run on top of the accounts module. Now the Habitat works outside the web root. So I actually have a website running separately from this structure, which I have installed using Sim. So this Habitat local, it is running inside my websites folder here as Habitat local. So this is a in the beginning, this was a completely blank Sitecore solution that I set up. I installed Web Forms Marketers. That's it. As I mentioned, it uses Unicorn for serialization. So if I go to /unicorn ASPX, I will see here all the different modules that's installed in Habitat. So here's all the different modules, and each module has a configuration. So it's possible to serialize and synchronize each feature in itself. I can also just run all the syncs at one. So if you don't know Unicorn, have a look at it and have a play around it. It's pretty simple to work with. So, right. Inside Visual Studio, you will see the same type of structure. So you'll see the different layers here. Inside the features, you'll see again the folders. So again, consistency in the way that it structures a set of conventions. And in here, we have two projects. One is the actual feature project, the functionality. Another is the unit tests. We're using, as I mentioned, this is working outside the web root. So we're using the standard Visual Studio publishing to publish modules to the project. So if I'm right-clicking a project here, I will be able to publish to my local website. As you notice, there's a whole lot of projects. So publishing all those is a quite tedious process, which is why we have build scripts to handle a lot of that. And when you go through the getting started process, this is a very important part. So these are tasks that run on top of the solution and makes sure that you do things the right way. So if you run the publish all project, for example, this will publish all these modules one by one, all these features one by one to the website. You only need to do this once in a while. Then when you're working with things like the source code, then you will build and then you will need to just publish that one module. There are a few scripts that I'll show you just in a second on how to automate a lot of that as well. Inside each of the features, we have configuration files as well. So again, the modularity is extended to all the parts of Sitecore. So configuration files is the same. If I look at, so we're using the Sitecore include files features to to do that. So if I look at, for example, this accounts part here, we register the login goal and the register goal. So when a user logs in, this is the goal that's triggered. If a user registers on the page, this is the goal that triggers. And there's a pipeline extension too. This serialization folder is what sets up the synchronization of Unicorn. So this is what serializes the data. Just back on the, we'll just get into that in a second. Also, if you do have changes to the web config, then inside the project layer, we're using the standard Visual Studio or MS Build XML transforms to do changes to the web config. So we're not. I guess that's also a quite important part of Habitat. Is we're trying to version as little as possible of the standard Sitecore stuff. So we do not want the web config to be part of the version control. We want the changes to the web config to be versioned, not the web config itself. So this is a tool for doing that, and there's a task in here to apply these XML transforms to the web config. So if you have a change in there, you run the script, and then the web config changes. So going back to the serialization again, this is Habitat using Unicorn. So the accounts module, for example, has 3 parts of Sitecore that it serializes. It has the templates for the accounts module, it has the renderings for the accounts module, and it has some templates in the core database that it serializes. These things are then, every time I change something inside Sitecore, these are then written down to disk in the accounts serialization folder. So there's a one-to-one between those things there and then these folders that appear here. So if I go into templates, you'll see this is the template structure inside Sitecore. You've got a folder called accounts, and then you've got each of the different templates here, and then under that you've got the fields in those templates, those kind of things. And these are all serialized YAML files, so it makes it easy to spot changes if there's if there's any changes from one developer to another. You can do a diff and see what has the person changed in a template. Right. So again, going back to the naming, as I mentioned, there's 3 layers, and in Habitat, we've decided to use Sitecore as the prefix. So Sitecore dot, and then we have the layer here, features dot, and then the name of the module. So this is a feature module, Sitecore feature accounts. If we have a foundation module over here, this is a Sitecore foundation assets. So these are the assemblies that are created. This is the naming that's used. Also, again, going back to the naming here, we are focusing on the business side of things, the domain language. This is about accounts management. So this is about users, logins, registrations, user profiles, that kind of thing. There's no technology naming in this part here. And the same in the foundation. In the indexing here, we are not concerned whether it's Lucene or Solar or anything. It's about indexing. So the search feature up here will use the indexing feature down here to actually access the indexes or have an overlying API for search. Now, dependencies inside Habitat is as I've tried to explain in the beginning, is quite pivotal. It's perhaps the most important thing in my experience to control in a Sitecore solution. Sitecore is not very easy to work with in the long run, as I mentioned, because very quickly dependencies get out of control. And you start seeing these things where you start changing one thing and another thing falls over. So dependencies is really important. And when I say dependencies, I mean dependencies in every aspect. One thing is, of course, if the search module up here uses the indexing module down here, then we have a hard reference in the references part here between the modules. So the search module is actually using the indexing module. So that's an easy reference to control. Another is things like Sitecore fields. So if you have a template with a field, then the name of that field can start appearing everywhere in code. And that's an equally important reference or dependency to control, but it's a very soft reference, which is why we're trying to make the references as hard as possible. Things like the templates and the fields, everything is referenced through code. There's different ways of doing this, and if you're using things like Glassmapper and those kind of things, then that's an equally fine way to do it. This is just a way to control that if the search feature defines a template, then we will have constants for that template. So the ID of that template, the fields of that template, and all code, whether it's in views or in C# code, everywhere, will reference this constant. It'll never reference the ID or the name of the field, always through this code. So it makes a soft reference harder, and then it makes it a lot easier to control. References in terms of packages, there's we're using NuGet to control external references. If we look at something like the theming project here, you'll notice that it's using Bootstrap. So this is the way that we pull in Bootstrap inside Habitat. Essentially, again, this is a foundation module, so all the features will depend on the theming here, and thus it'll depend on Bootstrap. If you want to change this to something else, you can change it to your own theming type, and then of course you'll have to change all the HTML in the features to depend on that new framework instead of Bootstrap. Right. Renderings. So if we look at the way renderings are built, then renderings reside, so that's the views, the controller renderings, they reside primarily in the feature modules, of course. So if you look at the website, the Habitat website, then the all the different parts of the solution, this teaser here, and if I go into the module and into not the project layer, into the feature layer, if I go to the media, for example, here, there's a set of different renderings that render different types of media, things like images and light boxes, those kind of things. Or if I go to the accounts feature, I have all the different login parts. Oh, I might need to just clear my cookies. So if I go to the accounts feature, then I've got the registration form here, which takes an email and password, the login form here, and the forgot password rendering. So these are 3 different renderings that are all created inside the accounts module. So renderings are typically reside in the feature layer, and they're in the views folder here, and under a folder called accounts. So these are the views that are in the accounts module. If I go over to the website, then during the publish process, these views will be published out to the Habitat website, and they'll reside here in the different folders. So this is the actual website. You'll see all the different renderings here. So tons of different renderings to build the pages from. There is, as I mentioned, there's some build scripts that makes it a bit easier for you to work with. There's some auto-publish tasks. So this is, if you don't know this task runner, this is a Node gulp task runner. All the tasks here are defined up in this gulp file, and it's a set of build scripts that makes it easier for you to work with the solution and automates parts of the solution. And when you create a new task here, it'll pop up in this task runner. There's 3 auto-published tasks that we've created. One is for assemblies, one is for CSS, and one is for views. If I run this, what'll happen is that Visual Studio will now have a file watcher on all CSHTML files, and it'll auto-publish that to the website. So if I'm working with views and I'm changing something here, let's look at the login here, and then just do, I'll just put a couple of that. Hopefully you'll see something happening here. You'll see that it's published that login file over to the website. So it makes it really easy to work with that. And then if I go over to my website here, I should see some exclamation marks on the login form. You'll just have to do a recompile. And then I have an error because there's a strange thing in my file there. So I'll just get rid of that, and it'll do a new publish down here. and I should see the page come up again. Okay, all good. So there's three of those: one for views, one for CSS, and another for assembly. So all the DLLs. So if I build some code, then it can automatically publish that DLL out to the website. So you don't have to manually do these publishes. Makes it a bit easier for you. Right. So HTML. HTML is another one of those. I'll just turn off this part here. HTML is another dependency killer. So we've chosen, as I mentioned, we've chosen to use Bootstrap as the HTML framework. So if we go into things like teasers here, and if you know Bootstrap, you'll see that things like the just a simple teaser here uses a thumbnail, and it has that teaser heading and those kind of things. So these parts are standard Bootstrap HTML. In the coming version of Habitat, we'll have a new Bootstrap theme put on top of everything. So you'll see a new visual design coming soon. This is a starter theme that we created, but it's important that the HTML, the standards of both the theme and the HTML, is very strict Bootstrap. Likewise, the CSS is done through Sass. So if I go down to theming here, we have all the style sheets here in Sass files, and we have the theming part here that actually imports all the Bootstrap. So this will create one CSS file from Bootstrap and our custom theming in one. So there's a bit of overwritten colors here and how some of the standard Bootstrap works, and then there's some things that are specific to the different features. But again, we're trying to keep it as simple and as standard as possible. We're using there's a plugin in Visual Studio called Web Essentials, which does the compilation of these files. So it's defined here. So if I change the Sass file, it'll automatically create a CSS file over here. Okay, so another thing is the structure of modules and websites, and how we then combine the different features into websites and pages. So as I mentioned, we have three different projects in Habitat. One is the Habitat project, another is the demo project, and another are the module, and another is a common. So starting with common. Common is a set of templates and views that makes it easier across multiple websites or solutions or different project layer modules. So we have the placeholder names are defined in common, and the overall structure of the page. Things like this 3-column layout here, this the footer down here, the header up here, those kind of things. And if I go to another project here, I'll just go to our one of the demo sites that we're creating. So we have everything running in a multi-site solution. So if I go to the Sitecore Legal Services project here, I will see that it changes over to another URL. But this is a different website. It uses, as you can see, it uses the same overall theme. So this will change in the future as well. But we don't have any top bar. The icons in the top, I don't know if you noticed that. This line up here changed. Of course, the content, the structure of the website changed. And another carousel up here. We have some different page types here. We have the customer, or the employee pages on the website. So if I go into Sitecore here, first of all, the demo site is maintained in a separate Sitecore solution. So we've got that the legal website maintained over here. All the serialization, all the content for that website is serialized onto to disk in a separate location. So all the templates and renderings and content and media, all the marketing configuration for that website is maintained in a separate location. So this is actually in another project over here. And if I go to the legal project, you'll see serialization here. And this is where all the content and the media, everything here is serialized. So when I set up my local Habitat installation, I have I of course deserialize the Habitat project because that's the foundation features, all the functionality. But then I have the option of deserializing different websites on top of that. So if I want the legal website in there, I can deserialize that as well and have that running in the same Sitecore solution. I could also just have the Habitat website only. And the Habitat website's content and structure is focused around showing off all the features and the renderings and pages of that's in the underlying framework. So let me just log in here and then go to the content editor and give you a view of the structure here. So again, I've got two different main websites, Habitat and Legal. The demo website is, I'm not going to dive into that. You can have a look yourself. It's a way of triggering demos, so running campaigns. If I want to show as a demo that I search on Google and then I hit a AdWords campaign, then on the demo website, we can create a mock-up of that Google page. So it makes it easier for us to trigger campaigns from third-party websites. But inside Habitat is the actual structure of the Habitat website with all the pages here, all the modules, all the features. And in the legal, we've got the equivalent legal pages with all the team, the content, and those kind of things. So if I look at then the structure of the website, so if I go down to templates, you'll see down here we have the feature, the foundation, and the project layer. So again, the consistent naming and architecture here. Again, under features, we've got all the different features. So template-wise, a feature module will create what we refer to as data templates. So data templates holds the fields and the structure that the feature itself requires. So if I look at things like teasers down here, we have teaser content. Actually, let me do page content instead. So page content is a very simple concept of a title, a summary, a body, and an image. So this is the typical content that a page or an article page would contain. So a title, a body, and maybe an image and a summary. If I go over to the website over here, or sorry, the Visual Studio project, we will see that the page content project has different renderings. One for the page title, a very simple rendering. All it does is it outputs the title field. We also have the page body, again, a very simple one that outputs the body field, and page image that outputs the page image. So these are three different renderings that you can then place on the pages to output standard content. So if I go up to an article page like this one and go to the presentation details, we will see that that page has those renderings on it. It's a bit slow now. Hello. Oh wow, it's very slow. Oh, there we go. So we'll see that the this page has the page. Where is it? Down here, page image, the page title, the page body, and then it has a whole lot of other renderings as well. So as you'll notice, this page type is very fragmented, and they all are in Habitat. So we don't statically bind any renderings. We always refer to them inside the page type. But the page type itself here is defined as an article in the Habitat project. So if I click on this template, we'll see that the template here is created under Habitat. So this is part of the Habitat project. So these are the page types that Habitat can contain. It contains articles, employees, news articles, news lists, sections, those kind of things. So an article here derives from different data templates. So it derives from the has page content templates, which means that an article has a title, a summary, a body, and an image. It also derives from, for example, navigable, which means that it has a menu title and it can be shown inside menus. Now, the navigable template itself is created in another module, the navigation module, over here, and that has a separate piece of number of fields. So navigation title shown in navigation, and in the Sitecore project or Visual Studio project over here, the renderings here, like the primary menu, the secondary menu, they're all using those fields, the menu title and the show in menu tick box, to determine whether that item should be shown in the menu. So again, it's isolated. The navigation component or module doesn't know anything about a page title, a page body, or a summary, those kind of things. And likewise, the page content module has no idea whether that page can be shown in menus. But the Habitat project, when you define your different project or page types over here, then you combine those different features on the pages. So you say, well, I want an article page, and I want it to be able to be shown in menus, which means that I derive from navigable. I hope that makes sense. If we take a news articles, for example, that derives from a news article template underneath, which has a bit more than page content. It has a date, things like that. But it doesn't derive from navigable, because I don't want news articles to be shown in the menu ever. I just want it to be in a news list. So that's why I've had the news list here. So, and there's a strange icon thing that is missing here, which is odd. So that's sort of the way that the websites are built. I see that I'm running out of time here, but it's the same applies for building up of the renderings. So if I look at an article here, and I look at the presentation layer, then as I showed you before, I'm then building the pages, the rendering structure from different renderings in different modules. So the page metadata, for example, is in the metadata project. The open graph rendering is in the social. So this is Facebook open graph. Link menu is in the navigation. Navbar is actually a sub layout that defines placeholders. So that's in the Habitat project, or sorry, in the common project. Logo is in the identity project, and so on and so on. Language selectors in the language project, those kind of things. If I if I have a project or a website where I don't want multi-language support, I can just take out the language parts on the pages. So I will define a new set of page types which doesn't have language selectors. So if I look at the legal website, that has a separate part of page types. It has another article here with another set of renderings on it. One of the things that we've taken out of the legal website is the ability to log in, for example. So there's no login and accounts parts on the legal website. Okay, I think we will just go back here, and just to have a bit of, just have 5 minutes for questions, and if there's anything you want to dive into, we can have a look at that as well. Just as a summary, again, going back to the first thing that I mentioned, Sitecore, in my view, is relatively easy to learn. There's a lot of developers over time that I've trained, and within a week, they understand the concepts. They can start building Sitecore solutions. What makes it hard in the end is the coupling and the structure. So if there's one thing to take away from this, it's not necessarily to start using Habitat, but it's to start controlling the dependencies and the coupling inside Sitecore. Same thing for when you're building solutions. You are, as developers and architects, you're responsible for the long-term investment here. The customer in the end will need to change things, need to extend things. If you don't build it the right way, then it's going to cost the customer a lot of money to change and to add things. So when you are under time pressure in a project, which we all are, it's important that we have the architectural principles at hand at all time, and we understand that when we're creating something and we're doing it quickly, we still do it the right way, so that when in 2 months, when the customer wants to change it, we can change it without disrupting anything else. And then consistency. Inside Habitat, you'll see we are trying to be as consistent as possible, to be really vigilant about dependencies and structure and architecture. This is, of course, primarily because it's an example. We want it to be a clean example of an architecture. We don't want it to be a muddled sort of in between. But I would say generally, try to be as consistent as possible. There are times in a project where you might need to jump over, do a shortcut. And this is where you write it down and then you refactor it later. But consistency is really important. So questions, anything you want to dive into? I can go on and on and on forever about this. So I'm going to open to you.
Yeah, I have a question now. What is this? I mean, how we manage the Sitecore future version support here? Is it?
What, Habitat?
Yeah.
No, it's, as I mentioned in the beginning, Habitat is not a module that is supported and versioned in that kind of way that like a Sitecore module. Habitat is an open source example of a website. So if do you know the launch Sitecore website?
Yes. So,
Okay.
but my question is, I mean, if we had some feature developed which uses some pipeline or something, how we, I mean, as a project, how we manage it?
Sorry, the sound is a bit bigger. Can you go, or a bit bad? Can you go closer to the microphone?
Yeah, no, I mean, not as a module, but I'm asking is if we had some pipeline functionality with the pipeline and show some web config changes have done, how we are going to, I mean, with the every version, are we maintaining some place that this is supported only for this one, no? Something like
that. So what's the support the supported versions of Sitecore. So today this is running on version 8.1, the latest release. I think it's called update 1. But the reason that we're trying to separate out the standard the standard Sitecore parts, we're not versioning any parts of standard Sitecore. So because what we want to do is we want to be able to upgrade to new versions as quickly as possible. But I would probably say, I don't want to be caught on this, but you could probably install this on any version of Sitecore 8. If you want to run it on version 8.0, you can run it there. You might even, with a few tweaks, run it on Sitecore 7, for that matter. I can't really. There might be a few API things you need to change to run it on Sitecore 7, but I'm fairly confident that you should be able to run it on Sitecore 7 as well.
Since these contain any modules which uses analytics like launch Sitecore site?
I'm not responsible for the launch Sitecore site, so I can't say whether it'll be discontinued or not. We are trying to consolidate across the different things that Sitecore is building, but again, this is maintained by someone else. So I can't tell that.
We are going to install the form marketing module to this Sitecore Habitat architecture. Do we have any? Can we do it with that like a modular architecture? If you install the form marketing, everything go as earlier one can we make it go into the sub layout and create new project kind of thing, layout and other stuff to the separate module?
I think you need to repeat that question closer to the microphone.
Let's say if you want to install waveform marketing module into this Habitat architecture project we are using Habitat architecture. Normally currently that configuration layout all are going to the normal that users.
The sound is really bad, so I can't really discern what you're saying.
Yeah, what he's asking is at the moment when you install Webforms Marketer via Sitecore, it gets installed to a predefined location. So in the case of using a project that is using a Habitat architecture, do we have to follow any other procedure for installing them? Or could it be configured to install via the general module installation?
No, so I'm using the Sitecore Instance Manager for all that. So I'm just basically installing Sitecore 8.1 and the Web Forms module on top. So it's a complete standard Sitecore installation that you do, and then you run the scripts inside the task runner here. That publishes all the projects out, and then you do a serialization using Unicorn. So basically the script here that you saw, which deserializes everything. So generally, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it as standard as possible, but also in terms of features, we'll make it as multi-site configurable as possible. So if you look at goals, for example, we have a habitat folder and a legal folder. So this is the goals that are triggered by the legal website. So if I'm serializing the legal website, then I will get these goals. The same with things like forms. I'm not sure we set it up yet. Where is it? Is it under modules? Web forms for marketers. Oh, yeah, here we go. So we've actually got a folder called legal where we have the legal forms in there. So the each module or each website is responsible for creating its own forms inside the forms module. Does that make sense?
So the form should sorry. Hello.
Yeah. Is there a question?
So the form into the, I mean, say that there is a module, and in Habitat Architecture we have a module, and the form should go into that module, inside that module, not into a predefined location like currently we have the web forms in one location like that.
Yes. So you notice that there's a yellow ribbon up here that says this item is controlled by Unicorn. It's because the legal folder here is controlled by Unicorn. If I go outside here, you'll see that it doesn't have that. So all the forms under sample forms, if I create a new sample form here, then it won't be serialized down on disk and it won't go into version control, which means that when I reinstall this website, and I can pretty much delete this Habitat website and reinstall it within 10 minutes, and then I'll have everything running again. There's no database backups, nothing like that. It's all serialized down to disk and version controlled. So if I go to the serialization here, and I go to the forms, web forms for marketers here, these are the actual forms that are serialized down on disk. If I go and change this field here and save that, you will see that this item over here, hopefully you'll see a red, it's very slow today.
What you mean to say is everything is being serialized and controlled using Unicorn.
Yes.
Okay, right, got it. Thanks.
So everything in here, hopefully somewhere in here, will have two exclamation marks. But this item will be changed by the serialization here, and then when I commit the change, then that will go into version control. The developer in Ukraine that I'm working with will then delete his website or do a sync on Unicorn and get those exclamation marks in his item as well.
One further question, can we get a certain part of this project? Say that we only need the carousel part and some teamwork section only?
Yes, that is I guess not the main point, because the main point of the modular architecture is productivity. It's a long-term productivity. But another side effect of this is reusability. So if you need a feature module like the accounts module, then you can actually just take this one folder, cut this out or copy it into your feature, paste it in, and you're pretty much good to go. The scripts that are running inside Visual Studio here uses the conventions to make sure that all the feature modules are published out. The configuration here inside, for example, the serialization, makes sure that a new module gets deserialized into the solution and those kind of things. So when you create a new feature or you copy a feature from another project, as long as you follow the conventions, that feature will plug straight in. And then, of course, the last thing you have to do is wire those. I got rid of the. Is wire those features up on the pages. So on the actual page types inside your solution or your website, you will need to, if let's say you're creating a new feature that shows a social login, and you want that to appear on all pages, then what you do is you go through the page types here one by one, and you add that rendering from that module in. So I'll just go in here, add a new control, and that comes from that rendering comes from the social module, and I want social links on all pages. So you see, the minute you put that folder in, that configuration file that serializes data gets into Sitecore. Unicorn will deserialize the renderings, and that new module will appear in this list. Does it make sense?
Yes, thanks.
One question. Currently, we are using Sitecore TDS, which is a development site for Sitecore. Are there any ways we can realize from using these tools, or we have to stick to the Unicorn?
Can you repeat that closer to the mic?
He's asking currently the projects, they use TDS, team development for Sitecore. So is there a compatibility between the two tools, or
can we use that tool, or we have
between
Unicorn
with Unicorn and TDS?
I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be able to use TDS. So I mean, the example that we have here is based on Unicorn, but and as you can see, the serialization is done through these configuration files. What you could have is you could create TDS projects for each of those. So you can have an account TDS project, a demo TDS project, an identity TDS project, and those kind of things, and then have TDS serialize and deserialize. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to use TDS. So as far as I know, it's you probably know more about TDS than I do, but the example that we put in here is primarily to show you the architecture. It's not to shove any tools down your throat or to be fixed on anything. You can even replace, if you want to, the task runner scripts. If you want to change it to something else, you can do that. Or as I mentioned, Bootstrap, you can change that to something else. Again, this is a methodology for you to adopt and change to your way of working. Any other questions?
No, I think that's it, Thomas.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, no worries. I hope that you got a good introduction, and you can start to play around with it, see the parts that you love and the parts that you don't love as much. And if you do have any feedback, either ping me on Twitter or Slack or whatever, and if you do have any issues with the code, we're very happy to see them in GitHub and answer it that way. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas, for your time and your early morning
Session.
Have a good day.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Have a good night.